So anyway, back to babies again. Some man named Augustus, seriously, that's a bad name, but it's got to be better than Decemberus, decided he wanted to make an enormous list of names, places and people. The only way Augustus could figure out who was to ask people to travel all the way back to where they were born and sign up on the list in each town. Can you imagine how long the queues were? Boring. So even though Mary was getting to be the size of a small house because she was engaged to Joe, a local carpenter, they both had to get themselves off to Bethlehem. That's where Joe was born.
Did you know Joe's great-granddad, 38 times great-granddad, was called David? In fact, most people knew him as King David. He once killed a giant called Goliath by throwing a pebble in his face. No, seriously, he did. You can check it out in the Bible in 1 Samuel chapter 17. And he was born in Bethlehem too. How awesome is that? Coincidence? Or all part of the plan?
When finally they arrived, Mary was getting pretty uncomfortable. Ew. When the baby decided to announce he was on his way. She sent Joe off to find them somewhere to stay. It was pretty urgent. Joe rushed back to Mary and said he'd found them a 5-star place to share with a few others that had a great ensuite facility and free snacks. Sweet. Unfortunately, it turned out that Joe hadn't quite understood what he had been told. They ended up in a place that certainly had one very bright star shining above it, and there were definitely others they had to share with, except they weren't people. They were animals. The ensuite facility was great for the cows and sheep, but Mary and Joe didn't enjoy the smell. Stinky. And the free snacks. Well, if you're a cow or a sheep, then hay makes a fantastic snack. But for Mary and Joe, a bit chewy. The hay might not have been tasty, but it gave Mary a great idea. She wrapped her newborn baby in a scratchy blanket and used the hay to make him a kind of nest in the animal's feed box. The sheep seemed pretty interested in their new snack, but Mary made sure they didn't nibble more than a few toes. Mary named the baby Jesus, just as the angel had said. While Mary was trying to get the new baby to fall asleep, some shepherds nearby were desperately trying to stay awake. Someone had to keep watch to make sure the sheep didn't get gobbled up by monsters. Well, by wolves or something. Just as the shepherd's eyes were beginning to close, they were almost blinded by a super bright light. They screwed their eyes up tightly and squinted at something big and white and shiny. The shiny something started to talk, and the shepherds were absolutely terrified. It said, "Don't be scared. I'm here to tell you something super awesome. Just over those hills, in the town where King David was born all those years ago, a new baby is lying in a nest made of hay, wrapped in a scratchy blanket and waiting to meet you. He was born for you. In fact, he's going to save you because he's the Saviour, the Messiah, the Lord." The shepherds looked at each other, then looked back at the shiny thing, then looked back at each other and said, I think it's an angel. Before they had time to answer, loads of other shiny guys appeared and started singing so loud that even when the shepherds put their fingers in their ears, they could still hear every word.
God is so amazing. He's worth more than anything ever. He's bringing peace to all on earth, and so we sing together. God is so amazing. He's worth more than anything ever. He brings peace to all on earth, and so we sing together. God is so amazing. He's worth more than anything ever. He brings peace to all on earth, and so we sing together. God is so amazing. He's worth more than anything ever. He brings peace to all on earth, and so we sing together.
By now, the shepherds had figured out that these were in fact angels. And because they'd heard that if angels gave you a message from God, you should do it, they decided that maybe they ought to go and visit this baby. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the shepherds were amazed. There he was, this tiny little baby, lying in a nest of hay in a place that cows and sheep had made smell quite interesting. The shepherds decided they should probably tell Mary what the angels had said about the baby being special, being a saviour. In fact, the Saviour, the Messiah, the Lord. Joe was slightly confused and thought perhaps the shepherds needed some sleep. But Mary listened to what they said, and she began to wonder.
Did you know Jesus equals Yeshua in Hebrew? Yeshua equals one who saves. Interesting coincidence?
The shepherds suddenly realised that they'd been away from their sheep for quite a while and remembered that they were supposed to be protecting them from wolves. They ran all the way back to their fields. But they were so excited by what they'd seen, they couldn't resist jumping up and down and dancing as they went. Let me assure you, shepherds dancing is like the worst kind of dancing you can imagine, majorly embarrassing. But the shepherds just didn't care. They were so excited, they tried to remember the song the angels had been singing earlier. God is so amazing, he's worth more than any of my sheep. He's bringing peace to all on earth, and soon we'll go to sleep.
A few days later, Mary and Joe took Jesus into the city. They had to take him to the temple and officially name him. Strangely, they also had to take 2 pigeons with them. We'll call them Ploppy and Prunella. Although maybe we shouldn't name them. Want to know why? Well, you can find out in the Bible, in Leviticus, chapter 12, verses 6 to 8. It's a bit gruesome. When Mary and Joe arrived at the temple, an old, wrinkly man, don't say anything, called Simeon was waiting for them. Mary and Joe had never met Simeon before, but he said that God had told him that they were coming to the temple, and had told him to come to the temple and wait for them to bring Jesus along. Suddenly, Simeon grabbed Jesus, held him high up in the air, and swung him around and around and around until he was super dizzy. Mary and Joe were just about to politely remove Jesus from this rather peculiar old man when he suddenly began to sing. I'm a servant of God, the one and only God. He's the only one who could, and I just knew he would. He sent the world a saviour to light the way for all, and now I've seen him. On my own, I know I'm ready to go home.
Mary and Joe held on to Ploppy and Prunella in their pigeon box and watched the old man in amazement. He sang and twirled Jesus around and around for what seemed like hours. Joe was beginning to wonder if he'd ever stop, when suddenly he turned to Mary and said, "The child will do amazing things." Mary thought that sounded good, but not everyone will like him. Mary and Joe wondered how the old man could know that and thought it was a bit mean to say such a thing about Jesus while he was only a baby. I mean, he could turn out all right, couldn't he? Simeon carried on. "He's going to do things you'd never imagine." That sounded good again. "But Mary, you will suffer because of him. You really will." What? Simeon handed Jesus back to Mary and wandered off. Joe was about to suggest that they went home before Simeon came back, when a tiny old lady walked right up to them. Joe bent down and peered into her raisin-like face. 2 tiny eyes stared back at him. It was Anna. Everyone knew Anna. She was always at the temple, serving God. She was virtually a part of the furniture. Anna was so excited to see Jesus that she told anyone who had ears all about him at least 3 times whenever she saw them. Eventually, Mary and Joe left the temple, and the city, and Bethlehem, and walked all the way back home to Nazareth. Ouch, the blisters. Then Jesus grew up a bit. He watched Joe make stuff out of wood. Some things he made were pretty awesome, some not so much. Joe made big tables, small tables, square tables, round tables, 4-legged tables, 3-legged tables, 2-legged tables. They didn't work out very well, and wooden spoons. Joe also made quite a few wonky tables, but he turned those into special sculptures and told people they were meant to be that way. Awkward. What kind of table would you have made? But as Jesus got older, he got stronger and taller and smarter and wiser. God made sure that he had everything he needed. Because Jesus, Mary and Joe were Jewish, every year they went back to the temple in Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover festival. What were they celebrating? Find out more with the Bible in Exodus 12. There were always hundreds of people eating strange food and saying lots of prayers. So it was pretty easy for Jesus to disappear among the crowds. And one year, when he was about 12, Mary and Joe actually left him behind. They didn't even notice that he was missing for a whole day. Mary said to Joe, "I thought he was with you." Then Joe said to Mary, "No, I thought he was with you." Then Mary said to her friends, "Is Jesus with you?" And they said, "No, we thought he was with you. You should keep your eye on him, you know." And so it went on. After a while, when they finally realised that Jesus wasn't with anybody, they decided they should probably go back and look for him. Oops.
Eventually, 3 days later, Mary and Joe found Jesus hanging out in the temple with all the teachers, asking loads of questions and saying things that even they didn't understand. He looked completely chilled, and he didn't even seem to have noticed that Mary and Joe had gone. When Mary told him how worried they'd been and told him they'd looked everywhere for him, Jesus said, "Well, why were you looking for me? Obviously, I'd be here in the temple because that's where my dad lives." Everyone stared, and Mary looked at Joe and whispered, "What's he talking about? We live in Nazareth." Mary and Joe kept a very close eye on Jesus as they made their way back to Nazareth for the second time. In fact, Mary kept a very close eye on Jesus as he grew older and stronger, and she continued to wander.